Chairman and members of the Downtown Development Authority, thank you very much for having this special meeting and giving us an opportunity to make a presentation. I think it's long awaited, much anticipated. Everyone excited about what we can do on the lakefront. And I think the presentation that you're going to see tonight, I think illustrates the great potential that the lakefront has and what we can do with the lakefront and how we can incorporate the standards that have already been approved by the voters back in 2007 and how we can incorporate those standards and really make something, I think, that would not only be attractive for the residents who live here, but those traveling down the interstate and other folks who live here in Southwest Louisiana. The one thing I'd like to highlight, what you're going to see tonight, is the work product that Steve Oubre and his staff came up with based on some workshops that they had last week. And again, I want to make sure that we understand as we move through this process that the workshops were intended to help us adapt the Pinnacle property to the design standards that the voters approved in 2007. Sometimes I think that because that happened about 8 years ago, sometimes things move so fast and other things happen, and we've done other things since then that sometimes it would, I think, be helpful if we have perhaps just a brief bit of history. And let me try to give you a perspective on that. If you will remember, those design standards and that voter referendum was based on a set of lakefront development guidelines that was produced through the recovery effort after Hurricane Rita. The state of Louisiana retained a staff, a group, Andres Dewani. I always want to call Andres, and his firm's name is DPZ. Dewani, Plater, Cyber, something. Okay, anyway. You got the name. Anyway, DPZ is the easiest way to say it, and that's the design firm. They're based in Miami, Florida. And they came, of course, and they had a series of public meetings on the lakefront. We had packed houses at the Civic Center, a lot of people involved in the process. We had charrettes over at the old Lakefront Hotel that had been owned by Harrah's at the time, and Harrah's was very gracious to allow us to use that facility to hold those charrettes and have those meetings. And anyway, as a result of that, in 2007, the voters approved a set of design standards applicable to the lakefront. And if you recall, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that map, you can probably close your eyes and see it. It delineates tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. It delineates the areas that are set aside for public use forever. Delineates the right-of-way that we reserved along the entire perimeter of the lakefront for public access. Part of the commitment that we made back in 2007 to preserve that public access along the perimeter of the lakefront. And the design guidelines that go along with that to help regulate, if you will, or control or help guide the development of the lakefront, the economic development of the lakefront, the retail development of the lake, the development and that I think so many people in the community are anxious to see. And so we've got those set of guidelines. And then, but remember, if you will, that the Pinnacle property, what we're going to be talking about and highlighting tonight, and we're going to be talking about not just the Pinnacle property, but it kind of forms the centerpiece of what we're talking about. The Pinnacle property was not a part of that proposition. And the reason it wasn't a part of the proposition is because the city didn't own it. It was owned by a private company. And of course, a few years after that, Pinnacle decided that they would donate that property to the city, and so the city acquired that property. And so now, as owner of that property, we want to incorporate that property into the plan that we adopted in 2007. So how do you do that? Well, this year, we filed a bill, a local bill, Senate Bill 211, handled by Senator Ronnie Johns, and that bill incorporates the Pinnacle property into the lakefront. And as a result of that legislation, which now, by the way, is on the governor's desk for signature, but as a result of that legislation, now the Pinnacle property will be subject to the same design standards, the same guidelines as the rest of the lakefront. And so the amendment, as I said, specifically includes that Pinnacle property, and it provides that the Pinnacle property can be developed for the purposes for which we approved back in 2007. And as long as we follow those guidelines as far as the Pinnacle property is concerned, we don't need to get separate voter approval. Before the law was amended, we could use that property just about any way that we saw fit. We were not restricted. We could do just about anything that we wanted with it. Of course, it has to go before the council. The council would have to approve that. But as a result of this new legislation that we passed this summer, now that property is subject to those same design standards. So last week's meetings was kind of intended to bring a cross-section of the community together to provide some input as to how we refine those design standards to apply to the Pinnacle property. And the design that Steve developed will be based on those, or is based on those comments. But it has to conform to those design standards that were approved in 2007. Again, that becomes the master plan, if you will. That's the core of our development. That centers around what the voters approved in 2007. Now, what you're going to see tonight is not the final plan. It'll be a suggested site plan with design standards to guide future development. We intend to solicit developers for the Pinnacle tract and provide them with this plan for development and show how it conforms to that 2007 voter referendum so that there will be sufficient clarity, so that people clearly understand what our expectations are. And when we say that we intend for you to develop in accordance with the voter referendum that was passed in 2007, this is a visual to show what we mean by that and how we think that this property can be developed in conformity with those design standards. Now, at the end of the day, the actual design of that project, or whatever that project is, whoever the developer is, or whoever the developers are, because we're not limiting it to one developer, but the ultimate design is going to have to be approved by the City Council. And we'll have to go through a whole new public process, okay, as far as approving a specific plan or a specific design for a specific project and a specific developer. That all has to go back before the City Council. And the final design that we're going to be looking at when that happens is going to be a design that is produced in consultation with the developer. But at the end of the day, that 2007 voter referendum defines what we can and cannot do. And we have to live by the standards that are incorporated into that voter referendum of 2007. So basically, our goal in this process to date has been to do our best to take advantage of the current market conditions and avoid future delay in the development of Lakefront. I don't think it's any secret. I read Facebook, I read the paper, I see the letters to the editor, and not just in the last several months, but over the last several years. I think everyone is ready to develop the Lakefront, and I think everyone understands the importance of that. We're very fortunate now that because of the renewed interest in this area as a result of the economic development that is planned for our area, a lot of people are taking a second look at this area and understanding a little bit better about what we have to offer in terms of lakefront development here in our community. But we also want to take advantage of this process to clearly define for developers that are looking at this property and looking at the lakefront what our expectations are. And essentially what you're going to see tonight is a visual representation of what that 2007 voter referendum was really all about and how it sort of brings to life those design standards. You know, we can look at them on paper, we can look at them in a brochure or whatever, but this brings to life those design standards. And it's, I think, helpful for the community, and it's also helpful for us as we go through this process, as we work through this process as a team. I also want to make sure that the developers understand, again, as I mentioned to you earlier, what our expectations are, and to use the design standards that Steve has developed and that you see tonight to help assure the voters that what we come up with conforms to what they voted for and what their expectations were back in 2007 when they approved this process. Bottom line in all of this is that if anybody ever wants to change and do something different, or change the design standards and to adopt a different philosophy of development or whatever, basically we have to do one or two things. Either go back to the voters and ask for a vote, or go and change the law. I don't think the law would ever change to remove from the process voter approval. I think that's critical to everything that we do. And that's why I think it is so important that as we move through this process, we honor that commitment that we made to the community in 2007. So you'll hear me talking about that a lot. And I want to make sure that as a Downtown Development Authority, you understand that those in the audience who hear the presentation and see what we're doing understand that we are living by the voter referendum from 2007, living by the design standards and the guidelines that were incorporated into that referendum and that have now been adopted and make a part of what our overall plan is for our lakefront. So the presentation you're going to see tonight from Steve, I think addresses that, does it very well. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we have a little bit of a ways to go, but we're very conscious about the time that it takes, and we're working on a process to condense the time. Normally, what you would probably do in a situation like this is issue a request for qualifications, and then they would come back with qualifications. Then you go out with a request for proposal, and you get formal proposals, and they would come up with a design like what you're going to see here. We're accelerating that project. We're designing it. We're looking at developing the actual concept so that there will be, like I said earlier, sufficient understanding in the mindset of a developer looking at this as to what the expectations are. So they're not just reading something on paper. They have a visual to look at. And then from a planning standpoint, you'll see in this presentation some pretty specific details about how streets are going to look, how the corridors are going to look, what the pedestrian ways are going to look like, and how that's going to be designed, and the parameters that need to be incorporated into any type of development in order to ensure that there's sufficient connectivity with the rest of the lakefront, and also that there's ample pedestrian involvement in that process. And I think you can appreciate, after looking at what we've done already on the lakefront with the promenade and the other improvements that we made downtown, how important pedestrian activity is. You know, and then I'm going to let Steve make the presentation, but I want you to think about this. Think about Rhine Street before we completed the rebuild of the sidewalks, okay? What did we do in downtown Lake Charles? All we did was rebuild sidewalks and install new streetlights. That's basically what we did. Carved out some bump outs. We included some green space. But what did it do? It transformed downtown. It made downtown a destination. And so when you see what we did downtown, when you see what we did on the promenade, that is just a taste of what we can do on the lakefront and what the design guidelines that we passed in 2007 are intended to produce on the lakefront. Same type of development. The pedestrian activity, the involvement of people walking and enjoying the view of the lake, but also walking and enjoying interactivity, interconnectivity all along the lakefront with the improvements that we build, that we construct, the public improvements, the parks, the public facilities that we own and operate, the civic center, but connecting all that is part of a overall development along the lakefront. Again, it's a long-term goal. It won't happen, the entire development won't happen in just a couple of years. It'll take a while for it to actually all build out and all happen. But the piece that we're focusing on now, the Pinnacle property, is, I think, perhaps the prime piece of property right now, is, I think, in relative terms, the easiest to develop, the quickest to develop, and I think that once it develops, then that will be the catalyst to get started, and a catalyst that will generate, with hopefully a lot quicker, more development, and that, again, it'll take place, hopefully, in a little bit faster timeline, simply because the economics of the local economy, I think, will support that type of development as well. And that's critical to all of this. If you don't remember, think back to 2008. Think about what happened in the financial markets in 2008 and how, you know, the economy was really struggling for several years after that financial situation occurred then. And of course that affected all types of development. And I think, if I remember correctly, I just saw an email today that had an article attached to it. It talked about the rebound of the hotel industry, how it's finally getting back and it's finally expanding and growing. So a lot has happened, of course, in recent years. And I think it's, the timing now is excellent from an economic standpoint. And so it's exciting to be a part of this process. And I think what you're going to see tonight is a great example of what we can do on the lakefront. So without any further ado, I'll ask Steve Oubre with Architects Southwest. I think most of you know Steve. Steve's been a great partner in this for this project. He was one of the original team members that came in with Andres Dewani in his group back in 2005, 2006. Helped us with our recovery plan, and also, as I said earlier, they helped develop the design guidelines and the design standards that were approved by the voters in 2007. So very pleased with the work he has done, and we really appreciate his involvement and his support and his input in getting us to this point. So Steve?
Thank you, Randy.